is K1 at the equinox point in Virgo. Here is R2 at the equinox point in Pisces. And here is A6 at the cross. The next process we must see now is how the 4 points of the 2 witnesses stand on their feet. And don't forget that these 4 points stand before the Lord of the earth, obviously on feet. And here you see well how the earth, with the 4 seasons, rotates and wobbles. This verse means nothing else than wait and simply let all 4 seasons pass. That is how all 4 points stand on their feet. And here we see the key to the correct understanding of who the 2 witnesses really are, actively applied. They are the 4 points of the 4 seasons, 2 equinox points and 2 solstice points. And once again, without this understanding, it's impossible to decipher chapter 11, and thus the mystery of the day of the return would remain hidden. In the table, the 4 seasons are presented seamlessly, and we come up to December 20, 2025, when autumn ends. At this point, I would like to quickly point to the 6th trumpet, or the 2nd woe. In earlier videos, we used the 2 lunar and solar eclipses at the beginning of the Jubilee year, that is, around March 2025, and in September 2025, for deciphering the hour, day, month, and year, and correctly arrived at September 21, 2025. When Charlie Kirk's memorial took place. There, the deception began, as sufficiently explained in the last video, The Bridegroom Cometh, Part 1. So far, so good. But look at the table. The 4 points also bring us to the same date. Here, again, is September 21, 2025. The previous option was not so bad, but this one is certainly the better and correct one. Back to Revelation 11. The next event we must see in the heavens is the loud voice at the end of the process of standing on their feet. And on December 21, 2025, one day after autumn ended, of course, the sun was exactly at the solstice point at the cross, which gives the loud voice. There, the Father is also depicted as the central black hole of our galaxy, Sagittarius A star. You remember. And again, the timeline is without interruption. So it should be. But this call must quickly be carried further to the 4 points of the 2 witnesses. Only the swift runner, the moon, has already passed the solstice point. It has effectively heard the call, but must still make one more round until it reaches all 4 points, including the cross point again. The last of the 4 points was informed of the loud call on January 16, 2026. And do you remember what was first understood or revealed by Brother John on that day? Exactly. The very date for the midnight cry that we presented at the beginning of the video. February 27, 2026. Can you see that the Lord is time? Well, how do you think it continues? And what is the ultimate task of the 2 witnesses now? Here again is the table with the dates, where the moon approaches the 4 points. During this time, the 2 witnesses, as the 4 points, ascend into heaven. And that describes the climax of their work, to proclaim the deciphered mystery of Revelation. And that is called proclaiming the true midnight cry. That can only be done when one has unlocked Revelation with biblical astronomy and discovered the date of the return. That is the time when the message of the 4th angel shines the brightest. That is the point when the Reformation that began about 500 years ago is successfully brought to completion. You see that this ascending into heaven must be completed by February 12, 2026 at the latest. While the moon approaches the 4 points of the 2 witnesses, and they ascend, The proclamation of the midnight cry must therefore take place. That is the ascension. That is why we have a certain time pressure to give this midnight cry. Our first video was published on February 4 to 5, and this second video you received on February 8 or 9, 2026, at the very latest. Why is that? The Lord has sent us some dreams in the last days, which, if we could interpret them correctly, point to the following. And the same hour was there a great earthquake, and the 10th part of the city fell, and in the earthquake were slain of men 7,000, and the remnant were affrighted, and gave glory to the God of heaven. The second woe is past, and behold, the third woe cometh quickly. The moon occults Antares, the heart of Scorpius. If you remember, Brother John and I have already pointed out in several videos that this row of stars counts 10 stars up to and including Antares. And according to the ancient drawing of Scorpius, there were still another 7 stars depicted here, because formerly Libra was the claws of the scorpion. And that reminds us of Revelation 17, where the beast, ridden by the whore Babylon, is described with 7 heads and 10 horns. The serpent-bearer Ophiuchus is the whore, and the G7, or the EU, would then be this beast. In any case, it very likely points to Europe. From the last video, you know that Europe is weakened, and Putin is also lying in wait. You know what I mean. In any case, this attack will conclude the second woe. And now you also understand why we published our first video for February 5. And this current video must be published at least before this possible attack. You see that between February 5 and February 12, all these things must happen. That is still in the same hour. How does it continue? The Bible text says it. The third woe cometh quickly. Here, there's no more timeline, for it ends with the same hour in which the terrible event takes place. With that, faith has largely become unnecessary, for the event opens everyone's eyes. No more faith is needed. In the picture, you see again, February 27, 2026, when the 7th trumpet will awaken the sleeping saints, and the rapture will take place. Read through the text of the 7th trumpet. There, hail is mentioned as the third woe at the end of the text, but it will only be for those left behind. This terrible event around February 10 or 11 will most likely cause the mark of the beast to be quickly proclaimed by law. The last remaining martyrs of Smyrna will give their final testimony, while Philadelphia publishes its final testimony with this video. And so, both candlesticks of the 2 churches shine so brightly that at this point we can cry out, "The bridegroom cometh." You have seen the harmony. Wake up and go out to meet him. Without comment, I show you 2 slides that once again depict the entire timeline I have been allowed to explain so far in full. After this hopefully impressive presentation of the timeline of the 2 witnesses, let's take another look at a few individual but important details in Revelation. Between January 23 and February 12, the enemies must also observe the loud testimony of the 2 witnesses. What are enemy constellations on the Mazzaroth? If one looks through them all, in this context, only Capricornus and Aquarius remain. You're already sufficiently familiar with Capricornus from the last video, which stands for the first beast in Europe, and the mark of the beast, Sunday sacredness. Just as the moon meets 3-eye Atlas in the image of the twins, that is, the good 2 witnesses, the sun activates the first enemy, and quite in the middle. Remember the last video where I was able to show you that the EU has a big problem and is splitting. The news about it first appeared in the press on January 27, But I think that by January 31, this plan was further refined. And here you see the split directly in the firmament. One side is the head part, and one is the tail part. And one thing is certain, because the construct of the EU is a child of the papacy, this beast will certainly not rejoice over the problems in the EU. I already mentioned it in part 1, but here again. Think of Daniel chapter 2, where the stone strikes the feet. You're living through it right now. I'd also like to mention at this point that on this January 31, respectively February 1, exactly 12 years of the judgment of the living have passed, which began in 2014. 12 years of sealing have come to a close. Remember, it was Jupiter that needed these 12 years in the Mazzaroth to complete a full round from the constellation of Gemini and back to Gemini again. So everything comes to perfect fulfillment. The second enemy is Aquarius, which in this context stands for the LGBT god Aquarius. And that points here to the second beast, the USA, because in 2015, Obama managed to allow same-sex marriage nationwide. In the last video, we reported on it again. You see that within the hour of the greatest testimony of the two witnesses, this enemy constellation is also activated by the sun. So we can state, God has presented two good witnesses in Gemini, Jesus as Pollux, who acts as the faithful and true witness, and Castor as his bride, his church. And Satan, who wants to imitate everything, also has two witnesses, Capricornus and Aquarius. Europe and the USA will see that the testimony of the two witnesses is true, and that the end has come. In any case, we've found 3 parts of the enemy, and that fulfills part of a verse in the 7th plague, namely Revelation 16:19. And the great city was divided into 3 parts, and the cities of the nations fell, and great Babylon came in remembrance before God, to give unto her the cup of the wine of the fierceness of his wrath. Take heed, for these remaining days before us will be tremendous in every respect. And since we're now in the 7th plague, let's also read the next verse, 20. And every island fled away, and the mountains were not found. You already know that this is a rapture verse, because the next verse, 21, is the terrible hail after the ascension. Brother John has already explained that the 2 fish stand for islands in the sea, as can be well seen here. And Capricornus stands for the mountains, because its name says so. In German, for example, it's mountain goat. How is the fleeing of the islands shown? Here, through Mercury, because just on February 27, it goes retrograde and turns back before the lying fish and flees. But it's still in the constellation. And why are no mountains to be found anymore? Because at the same moment, Mars has just left the constellation of Capricornus. Spot on, I would say. Another proof for February 27, 2026, as the rapture day. And we have another rapture moment in Revelation, namely at the end of Revelation 18. From verse 22 onward, it's reported that the voice of the bride and bridegroom is no longer heard in Babylon, and the verse before describes the last sign before the rapture. Let's read. And a mighty angel took up a stone like a great millstone, and cast it into the sea, saying, Thus with violence shall that great city Babylon be thrown down, and shall be found no more at all. Here on February 18, we have the great angel, Aquarius. And in antiquity, a millstone describes a fixed lower part and a rotating upper part as a stone. In heavenly language, this is simply an occultation of 2 actors. This sign, or foreshadowing, is given on February 18. Here we have Mercury, and the moon exactly occults it when using a location in the USA, in this case, Florida. I think that says it all. It's the last certain sign in the third hour of Babylon's fall, as the sun entered Aquarius, and the great city will certainly